Fayetteville, West Virginia. Christmas Eve, 1945. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and anticipation. Inside the Sodder family home, warmth radiated from every corner. George and Jennie Sodder, pillars of their Italian-American community, watched their 10 children a vibrant symphony of laughter and youthful energy. The youngest, Sylvia, just 2 years old, was already asleep, dreaming of Santa. Her older siblings, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, were still awake, buzzing with excitement, allowed to stay up a little later than usual. The house, a 2-story timber frame, was alive with the spirit of the season. Christmas lights twinkled, casting a soft, inviting glow. The radio played festive tunes, mingling with the happy chatter. George, a successful trucking company owner, had worked hard to provide this idyllic scene. Jennie, his devoted wife, had filled the home with love and the aroma of holiday baking. It was a picture of perfect American post-war bliss, a family united, safe, and looking forward to a bright future. But beneath the surface of this festive tableau, something sinister was stirring. A flicker, a spark, an almost imperceptible shift in the air. At around 1 a.m., Jennie was jolted awake by the distinct smell of smoke. She found the office of George, usually a sanctuary of order, engulfed in flames. The fire, a hungry living entity, was already devouring the heart of their home. The joyous sounds of Christmas Eve were abruptly silenced, replaced by the terrifying roar of an inferno. The lives of 5 Sodder children, still sleeping, were now hanging by the most fragile of threads. A night of joy had turned in an instant to unimaginable horror. The smell of smoke quickly intensified, turning into a choking, acrid cloud. George Sodder, a man of strength and resourcefulness, sprang into action. He roused his older children, John George Jr., and Sylvia, guiding them safely out of the burning house. But 5 others, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, were still trapped upstairs, their bedrooms now engulfed in a terrifying orange glow. The crackling of the fire grew louder, a hungry beast devouring timber and hope. The mind of George raced, desperate for a way to reach them. He ran to his truck, parked outside, hoping to use its ladder to reach the second-story windows. But the truck, which had worked perfectly just hours before, refused to start. He tried again and again, the engine sputtering, then dying, a cruel mockery of his efforts. The air filled with the frantic shouts of the children who had escaped their cries, mingling with the roar of the flames. Desperation clawed at him. Next he grabbed a ladder, usually propped against the house. But it was gone, vanished. In the chaos he searched frantically, his hands burning from the heat radiating from the house, his eyes stinging from the smoke. The ladder, a simple tool, was now a lifeline, and it was nowhere to be found. This was not just bad luck, it was a series of impossible failures. Nothing was as it seemed that night. Jennie, meanwhile, tried to call the fire department. She rushed to the phone, her heart pounding, only to find the line dead. She tried again and again. Silence. A chilling, unresponsive silence that amplified the screams of the fire. A neighbor, alerted by the inferno, also tried to call, only to find their line inexplicably out of service too. Precious minutes, vital for saving lives, slipped away, swallowed by a faulty connection. As the inferno raged, a strange detail emerged from the chaos. George later recounted hearing a distinct, heavy thump on the roof just before the fire truly took hold. A sound like something being dropped or perhaps placed. It was a detail that would haunt him, a discordant note in the symphony of destruction. Was it a falling ember or something far more deliberate? By the time the fire department finally arrived, alerted by a passing motorist, it was too late. The Sodder home was a skeletal ruin, a smoldering monument to a Christmas Eve nightmare. The firefighters, exhausted and grim-faced, could do little more than douse the remaining embers. The immediate survival of the children had been lost to a series of baffling obstacles and inexplicable delays. The question of the fire's origin and the fate of the 5 children was already shrouded in confusion, a mystery born from the ashes. As the first gray light of Christmas morning crept over Fayetteville, it illuminated a scene of utter devastation. The Sodder home, once a beacon of warmth and family, was now a skeletal husk, a monument of charred timber and smoldering ash. A bitter wind whispered through the ruins, carrying the scent of burnt wood and a profound, chilling silence. George and Jennie Sodder, along with their 4 surviving children, stood numbly, their faces streaked with soot and tears, watching the firefighters sift through the debris. The immediate agonizing task was to find the remains of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. Logic dictated that in such an intense blaze, their bodies would be reduced to bone fragments, perhaps even ash. But as hours turned into a full day, and then into the next, a horrifying truth began to emerge. The search yielded nothing. No bones, no teeth, no trace of the 5 children, not a single identifiable fragment. Jennie Sodder, her grief, a raw, open wound, felt a cold dread settle deep in her heart. She knew the human body. She knew what fire did. Even in the most catastrophic infernos, some evidence, some small calcified remnant always remained. Yet here there was nothing. The ground beneath the bedrooms of the children where they were last seen was meticulously combed, yet it offered only silence. The absence of evidence was evidence itself, she thought, a chilling refrain echoing in her mind. Local authorities, exhausted and overwhelmed, eventually concluded that the fire had been so hot it had completely incinerated the children. They suggested that the intense heat had vaporized their bodies, leaving no trace. But Jennie, a mother who had borne and raised these children, refused to accept it. Her intuition screamed otherwise. How could 5 human beings simply vanish into thin air? The very notion defied everything she knew, everything she felt. George, though initially more inclined to believe the official explanation, found himself increasingly swayed by the unwavering conviction of Jennie. He remembered the truck that wouldn't start the missing ladder, the dead phone lines. These were not mere coincidences. They were anomalies that gnawed at the edges of his grief. The cold morning light revealed not just the physical destruction of their home, but the dawning, terrifying realization that their children might not have perished in the flames at all. Instead, a far more sinister possibility began to take root in the ashes of their doubt. In the days following the fire, the official investigation into the Sodder tragedy began, or rather, quickly concluded. The local fire marshal, a man named F.J. Morris, arrived on the scene. His examination was brief, almost perfunctory. He declared the cause of the fire to be faulty wiring, a common enough explanation in post-war homes. This pronouncement, delivered with a dismissive wave, was meant to provide closure. But for George and Jennie Sodder, it only ignited a deeper, more profound sense of injustice. Their frustration mounted as they watched the authorities. The initial search for remains had been shockingly inadequate. The fire marshal, without any forensic expertise, had simply accepted the theory that the children had been completely incinerated. No extensive excavation was ordered. No soil samples were taken. The site, a potential goldmine of evidence, was treated as nothing more than a tragic accident, quickly cleared and dismissed. Justice denied, questions ignored. George and Jennie, still reeling from their loss, found themselves battling not just grief but a wall of bureaucratic indifference. They pointed to the truck that wouldn't start the missing ladder, the dead phone lines. They spoke of the strange thump on the roof. Each anomaly was met with a shrug, a dismissive glance, or a patronizing explanation. The official narrative was set faulty wiring, complete incineration. Any deviation from this story was seen as the product of grieving parents in denial. The Sodders' pushback against this official narrative was immediate and fierce. George, a man accustomed to taking charge, found himself powerless against the inertia of the system. He argued that if the fire had been hot enough to vaporize 5 bodies, it should have also consumed the heavy appliances of the house, like the stove and water heater. Yet these items were found largely intact, albeit charred. He questioned why, if the fire was so intense, no trace of bone fragments, no dental records, nothing at all had been found. The local coroner, a man who had not even been present at the scene, quickly issued death certificates for the 5 children, listing fire as the cause. This swift, unquestioning closure felt like a betrayal. It was as if the authorities were more interested in tidying up the case than in uncovering the truth. The integrity of the investigation was compromised from the start, leaving George and Jennie with a gnawing certainty that something far more sinister had occurred and that the official channels were either unwilling or unable to see. The dust of official reports settled, but the questions in the Sodders' hearts only grew louder. As the official investigation stalled, George and Jennie Sodder found themselves increasingly isolated, their grief compounded by a growing sense of unease. The anomalies surrounding the fire weren't just coincidences. They felt like pieces of a puzzle deliberately scattered. A web of strange coincidences or a sinister plot. The question began to haunt their every waking moment. Days before the fire, Jennie had received a strange phone call. The voice of a woman unfamiliar and hurried to ask for someone Jennie didn't know. When Jennie explained she had the wrong number, the caller simply laughed, a chilling disembodied sound before hanging up. It was a fleeting moment, easily dismissed at the time, but in the aftermath of the tragedy, it took on a sinister resonance. Was it a test, a distraction? Then there was the man. Jennie remembered seeing a dark figure watching their house from a distance just days before Christmas Eve. He lingered in the shadows, his presence unsettling, his gaze fixed on their home. When confronted, he simply vanished into the night. Fayetteville was a small town where strangers stood out. This man, however, remained a phantom, a silent observer, whose purpose was terrifyingly unclear. Adding to their growing paranoia were the threats George had received months earlier. An insurance salesman, angered by the outspoken criticism of George of Mussolini, had warned him that his house would be burned down and your children destroyed. He even added chillingly that George would get what is coming to him. George, a man of strong opinions, had dismissed it as idle bluster. Now the words echoed in his mind, cold and prophetic. Was this a personal vendetta escalating to unimaginable horror? The most perplexing detail, however, involved the fuse box. In the frantic moments before the fire, George had tried to turn on the lights to search for his children. He discovered the main fuse box located in the basement had been tampered with. The fuses were missing, not blown but times removed asterisk. It was a deliberate act, one that plunged the house into darkness and crippled the efforts of George to save his family. Who would do such a thing and why? These weren't random occurrences. They were threads in a dark tapestry weaving together a narrative far more complex than a simple electrical fire. The Sodders felt watch targeted, the safety of the family compromised long before the flames erupted. The whispers in the dark grew louder, suggesting a conspiracy, a deliberate act of malice that had stolen their children and then vanished into the night, leaving behind only questions and a profound, chilling sense of dread. Years passed, but the fire that consumed the Sodder home never truly died in the hearts of George and Jennie. The official silence, the dismissive explanations, only fueled their conviction that their children were not lost to the flames, but to something far more sinister. They refused to let the case go cold. With their own resources, they hired private investigators, determined to unearth the truth that the authorities had ignored. Their relentless pursuit of answers led them back to the very ground where their home once stood. In 1949, 4 years after the fire, the Sodders decided to excavate the basement of their former home. They brought in heavy machinery digging through the layers of ash, debris, and earth that had settled over the site. It was a painstaking, emotionally grueling process, a desperate search for any sign, any fragment that could confirm or deny their deepest fears. The air was thick with dust and the unspoken hopes of a family clinging to a fragile thread of possibility. Then a discovery. Amidst the charred earth and rubble, a small calcified object was unearthed. It was a human vertebra. A single stark bone, seemingly out of place yet undeniably real. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, a wave of false hope washed over George and Jennie. Could this be it? Could this be the first tangible proof of the fate of their children, a piece of one of their lost five? The bone, small and silent, seemed to speak volumes, promising an answer. The vertebra was sent to the Smithsonian Institution for Forensic Analysis. George and Jennie waited their lives suspended in a torturous limbo, clinging to the hope that this single bone would finally bring them clarity, if not peace. The sterile lab environment, far removed from the emotional wreckage of Fayetteville, held the key to their future. The results, when they finally arrived, were a cruel twist of fate. The forensic experts confirmed it was indeed a human vertebra. But the analysis also revealed a devastating truth. The bone belonged to an adult, not a child. And more specifically, it showed no signs of having been exposed to fire. The moment of fleeting hope turned to ash, leaving behind renewed despair and a fresh wave of confusion. Every answer, it seemed, only brought more questions. The discovery, instead of providing closure, only deepened the mystery. If the bone was not from their children, whose was it, and how did it come to be buried beneath their burned-out home? The incident served as a stark reminder that the path to truth was fraught with misleading clues, each one a painful detour in their unending search for their lost children. The bone that spoke had only whispered another riddle into the wind. For George and Jennie Sodder, the absence of their children was a wound that refused to heal. The official pronouncements, the inconclusive bone, none of it could extinguish the flickering flame of hope in the heart of Jennie. She believed with an unwavering conviction that her children were alive somewhere and that the love of a mother knows no bounds. This belief transformed her grief into an enduring obsession, a relentless quest that would define the rest of her life. Reports began to trickle in whispers from across the country. People claimed to have seen the Sodder children or individuals resembling them with strangers. A woman in Charleston, West Virginia swore she saw Martha Sodder, then a teenager, with two other children, accompanied by two adults. Another sighting placed Louis Sodder working in a restaurant in Texas years after the fire. Each report, however vague or unsubstantiated, sent Jennie on a new journey, a desperate chase across long, lonely roads, through dusty small towns and bustling roadside diners. She carried faded photographs of her children, their young faces frozen in time, showing them to anyone who would listen. She interviewed countless strangers, her voice hoarse with hope and exhaustion, her eyes scanning every crowd, every passing face for a glimpse of her lost ones. George, though perhaps more pragmatic, supported her every step, funding the private investigations and the endless travel. Their home, rebuilt on the same property, became a command center for their personal crusade, filled with maps, notes, and the ghosts of 5 unseen children. But Jennie knew that her search, however tireless, needed a wider reach. She needed to keep their faces, their story, alive in the public consciousness. In 1952, George and Jennie erected a massive billboard on U.S. Route 16, just outside Fayetteville. It was an imposing, weathered sentinel, a stark public declaration of their enduring pain and unwavering hope. The billboard featured large photographs of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, their smiles preserved against a backdrop of a haunting question: what happened to the Sodder children? Beneath their images, a reward was offered, increasing over the years to $5,000, then $10,000. This iconic billboard became a landmark, a silent testament to the refusal of a mother to surrender. It was a constant visual plea to the world, a desperate attempt to pierce through the veil of silence and mystery that had swallowed her children. For decades, it stood exposed to the elements, its paint fading, but its message unwavering. The Sodder children were still missing, and their parents would never stop looking. The image of those young faces, forever young, burned into the memory of all who passed, a poignant symbol of the unending search of a family. Decades had passed since the fire, the billboard, a constant fading monument to the enduring pain of the Sodder family. George and Jennie, now elderly, still clung to the hope that one day a definitive answer would emerge from the shadows. Then, in 1967, a letter arrived. It was a worn-aged postcard postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. The trembling hands of Jennie opened it, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and intense hope. The image on the front was a familiar one, a young man perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, but it was the message on the back that sent a shockwave through the Sodder home. It read, Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Ill boys, a 901, 32, or 35. The handwriting, though matured, bore a haunting resemblance to the childhood script of Louis. The photograph, too, seemed to show a grown-up version of their missing son, Louis, who would have been 42 years old at the time. This was it. The closest they ever came to an answer. George and Jennie immediately contacted the FBI. This was no longer a local mystery. It was a potential breakthrough in a national cold case. FBI agents, their faces etched with a professional intensity, arrived at the Sodder home. They examined the postcard, the photograph, the cryptic message. The stakes were immense. The potential reunion of a family torn apart by an unimaginable tragedy, the revelation of a truth buried for over 2 decades. The postcard, a fragile piece of paper, became the focal point of a renewed, albeit brief, investigation. The FBI took the postcard for extensive forensic analysis. Handwriting experts meticulously compared the script to samples of the childhood writing of Louis. Photo analysts scrutinized the image, searching for definitive matches for any undeniable proof that this was indeed Louis Sodder. The quiet hum of the forensic lab, usually a place of cold hard facts, now held the weight of the desperate longing of a family. Jennie, her eyes fixed on the worn photograph, felt a surge of maternal recognition. She believed with every fiber of her being that this was her son. She even sent her eldest son, John, to Central City, Kentucky to investigate, but he found nothing. The trail was cold, the leads elusive. The findings of the FBI when they finally came were a crushing blow. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. The photograph, while bearing a resemblance, could not be definitively identified as Louis Sodder. The agency, citing a lack of concrete evidence and the passage of time, ultimately closed their investigation into the postcard. The intense hope that had flared so brightly was slowly, painfully extinguished, replaced by a familiar, bitter disappointment. The ghost of Louis, glimpsed for a moment, had once again retreated into the shadows, leaving the Sodders with only more questions and the agonizing knowledge of how close they had come. The inconclusive findings of the FBI on the postcard were a final, devastating blow to George and Jennie Sodder. The brief, intense flicker of hope that Louis might be alive, that a tangible clue had finally surfaced, was extinguished. The agency, unable to definitively link the postcard to their missing son, officially closed their file on the Sodder case. For the authorities, the mystery had run its course. But for the Sodder family, the search was far from over, a mystery that refused to die. George Sodder, a man of immense strength and unwavering resolve, had poured his life savings and every ounce of his energy into finding his children. He had fought the fire, battled bureaucratic indifference, and chased every lead, no matter how faint. But the weight of the unknown, the decades of unanswered questions, eventually took its toll. In 1969, 24 years after the fire, George passed away, his heart heavy with grief and the agonizing burden of never knowing what truly happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. He was buried in Fayetteville, leaving Jennie to carry the torch of their unending quest alone. Jennie Sodder, however, was not broken. If anything, the passing of George only solidified her fierce determination. She continued her solitary quest, a figure of quiet dignity and enduring grief. The billboard on Route 16, now weathered and faded, remained her silent partner, a testament to her unwavering belief. She updated the photographs, repainted the letters, ensuring that no one driving through Fayetteville could forget the faces of her lost children. She continued to follow up on every tip, no matter how improbable her hope, a fragile but persistent ember in the darkness. She lived in the rebuilt home, surrounded by the memories of her family, the silence of the empty rooms, a constant reminder of what was lost. Her surviving children, now adults, supported her, but the primary burden of the search fell squarely on the shoulders of Jennie. She became a symbol of the relentless love of a mother, a woman who refused to accept the finality of an unsolved mystery. As the years turned into decades, the case of the Sodder children slowly faded from the national headlines, becoming a local legend, a chilling ghost story whispered in West Virginia. The official files remained closed, the leads exhausted, the witnesses gone. The case went cold, a stark testament to the power of the unknown. But for Jennie, the search was never cold. It was a living, breathing part of her existence, a promise she had made to her children, a promise she would carry to her grave. She stood before the billboard, a solitary figure in the fading daylight, her gaze fixed on the faces of her children, refusing to let their memory or their mystery die. Jennie Sodder passed away in 1989, 44 years after that fateful Christmas Eve. She never stopped searching, never gave up hope. Her children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, were never found. The billboard, a testament to her unwavering love, remained standing for decades, a silent, weathered monument to a mystery that refused to die. Today, the lot where the Sodder home once stood is empty, a quiet patch of land in Fayetteville, but the questions surrounding that night still burn with an unsettling intensity. Some fires, it seems, burn forever, leaving only questions. Let us recap the anomalies, the discordant notes in this tragic symphony of the unknown. The strange phone call to Jennie, the phantom man watching their home, the chilling threats of the insurance salesman, were these mere coincidences or threads in a deliberate, sinister plot? The truck that would not start the missing ladder, the inexplicably dead phone lines, and the tampered fuse box. Each obstacle seemed designed to prevent rescue, to ensure the children could not escape, and that help could not arrive. These were not random acts of misfortune. They were a pattern of calculated sabotage. And then the most profound anomaly of all, the complete absence of human remains. Forensic science tells us that even in the most intense fires, some bone fragments, some dental evidence always survive. Yet the Sodder basement yielded nothing. No trace of 5 children. This fact alone defies conventional explanation, challenging the very foundation of the official faulty wiring complete incineration theory. The discovery of an adult vertebra untouched by fire only deepened the enigma, adding another layer of baffling complexity to an already impenetrable case. The psychological impact on the Sodder family was profound and enduring. The surviving children lived with the constant shadow of their missing siblings, forever wondering about their fate. Sylvia, the youngest to escape, carried the weight of the mystery throughout her life, becoming a fierce advocate for the search of her parents. The family was torn between grief and a desperate, almost obsessive hope. Every stranger was a potential lead, every phone call a possible breakthrough. Their lives became a testament to the human spirit's refusal to accept the unacceptable, to surrender to the unknown. The legacy of the Sodder children is not just a local legend. It is a haunting chapter in American true crime, a case studied by investigators and true crime enthusiasts worldwide. It stands as a stark reminder of how easily the truth can be buried, how quickly official narratives can be formed, and how powerfully the intuition of a parent can defy all logic. The empty frames in the memory of the family, like the empty lot in Fayetteville, represent a void that can never truly be filled. The story of the Sodder children forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, about the limits of investigation, and about the dark capabilities of human malice. It challenges our understanding of what is possible and what can truly vanish without a trace. What if the fire was not an accident at all, but a meticulously planned abduction orchestrated by individuals with a motive so dark, so powerful, that they could manipulate an entire town's silence and investigation and make 5 children disappear into thin air? What if the thump on the roof was not a falling ember, but the sound of a child being removed or a device being placed? What if the faulty phone lines and the missing ladder were not coincidences, but deliberate acts to ensure the children were taken, not burned? If the children were indeed abducted, then the lifelong quest of the Sodder family was not a futile chase, but a righteous pursuit of justice against an unseen enemy. And if they were taken, then somewhere, perhaps the truth still exists, waiting to be unearthed, waiting to finally bring peace to the memory of George and Jennie Sodder and to the 5 children who vanished into the Christmas Eve night. The fire may have consumed their home, but the mystery of the Sodder children continues to burn an eternal flame in the annals of the Unsolved.